Members, could you please turn off all the mics? Turn off all the mics. The next speaker is going to be the member from Portland Eastern. And after the Portland Eastern, we're going to have the member from St. Andrew North Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Madam Speaker, thank you. I see you have returned. Madam Speaker, I rise to give my contribution, and it is one in a legal context. I will just address the first aspect, which is, it speaks of a bill entitled, and there's just one particular aspect that I'm highlighting. It says for resilience generally. And it is in that regard that I'm formulating my contribution. Now, section 2 speaks about definition. And I will just simply say that there are, in relation to resilience, Madam Speaker, the definition of resilience in this regard, I would only suggest humbly that it be included. The absence of it leaves it wide open, and it could contemplate resilience as we make it up as we go, and it needs to give some form of direction in that regard. So I would just put for the record a definition similar to that in the UK, which says the Act ought to define resilience as the ability to anticipate, assess, prevent, mitigate, respond to, and recover from natural hazards, deliberate attacks, geopolitical instability, disease outbreaks, and other disruptive events, civil emergencies, or threats to our way of life. I'm taking a point, but to say, Mr. Prime Minister, no, I'm using, but I just wish to say that because this bill comes from Parliament, and we are invited to say we are collectively passing legislation, the legislation at all times must contemplate gaps. We must fill them so that we don't appear to be incompetent. That is my contribution. Thank you. Now, in relation to, and I would invite my friends. I would invite my friends also to look at section 19.3. And 19.3 speaks about the plans and what the authorities shall do. In 19.3 it says the development of projects, programs, and plans shall prioritize. 19.3b speaks of the achievement of climate and disaster resilience. That again is a legal term of art that requires definition for us. I would only suggest then that we would have something similar to say that disaster resilience is the ability of communities and organizations and states to adapt to and recover from hazards, shocks, or stresses without compromising long-term prospects of development. Again, because it is a term of art, it's something that ought to be included in the definition. For your consideration. Now, I speak about vagueness, and vagueness, it requires definitions or revisiting the language so that it is not open to absurd interpretations when it leaves Parliament. So, Parliament may not have intended a particular interpretation, but the way the legislation is drafted, you might find that judges may interpret it differently and it goes outside, but it also brings us to litigation that I don't think that it would be necessary if we spend the time and mature consideration to ensure that the legislation meets the object and purpose. So if the bill were to pass without the necessary amendments, we will find ourselves in that situation. So I'm just humbly suggesting that we revisit in that regard. For example, Madam Speaker, the legislation speaks of the minister, and my question to the House, who is the minister in this regard? If it is the Prime Minister, the legislation speaks in the schedule, separate from the minister, what the Prime Minister can do in relation to revocation of the CEO. So if the Prime Minister and the minister is one in the same, it becomes problematic. And I'm simply saying, who is the minister? That's open-ended, and it's something to consider in relation to interpretation. Very well. No, this part, if for this, with the white, I'm saying, no, I understand that, Mr. Prime Minister, but you would appreciate that in this particular legislation, it makes references to the Prime Minister and it makes to a minister. So because of that, I'm saying it needs to have clarity, because there are 3 ministers operating all at once in this legislation. I'm assuming the Minister of Finance. I see the minister, which could be the Prime Minister, then there is delegation. There's so many things happening at once that when it comes to the filling the accountability gap, this will be necessary. So it's just revisiting, and it's not difficult to do in a simple amendment. Who is the minister? And that falls within definition. I will only say in relation to directives and directions that it opens a Pandora's box. That is something that can be revisited. Now, I do not see where in the Act that putting vulnerable people at the center of our risk assessment for the rebuilding and resilience effort. It's nowhere in the Act. I read it here, I read it elsewhere, and the assumption from a human rights plane, from the speaking for the least among us, which oftentimes is the youth and the elderly. The rest can say include me, but they're the rebuilding, reconstruction, resilience ought to consider the vulnerable. That is absent. That's something we need to think about. Also, because it is important to develop resilience, which was absent from the definition, there is nothing to measure resilience. I would only hope or urge my colleagues that we include something in the legislation itself that shows that we are trying to measure resilience, not in the big world, but for Jamaica or Ireland. So, because there's currently no common methodology for measuring overall national resilience, having a benchmark from which to assess whether Jamaica is ready to absorb and adapt to threats and risks would allow us to measure the effectiveness of our reconstruction and resilience effort and model so that it becomes apparent we are making informed decisions on the trade-offs between investing and intervening in different risk areas. So given the wide powers to the minister and the CEO under the Act, it is important that something is included. A mechanism is included, and I don't think that appointing a board to do that or any mention of such a board, in the absence of that, the legislation would be wholly ineffective to achieve the object and purpose that it was intended for. Now, I'll just address my concerns seriatim or point by point in relation to the sections. Having said the definition section, section 2 now says that the minister may by order alter paragraph A of the definition of works. Now, one would appreciate that in the absence of a definition of resilience, it affects the power of the minister. So again, that's my pitch to say we have to include the resilience aspect. Section 4, functions of the authority. Madam Speaker, I need your protection on this one. At paragraph F, there seems to be a typo, A-N-D. Please fix it. Now, I'll just work with me, please. Eh, In this day and age, it's important. There is a section 5.5 which speaks about what the Minister of Finance, the minister responsible for public service, that in relation to salaries. It is missing there is an accountability gap. So if you look at 5.5, it says that the chief executive officer, he creates people who he hires and he's paying them, and it has salary cap, similar to that in the government work. When it comes to section 71, the minister appoints his committee and they are able to get remuneration. It also says honorarium, salary, or fees and such allowances. I would simply say that this section is circumventing the salary scheme, and as it is not subjected to section 5. I'm just simply saying it's similar to section 5. I'm just saying similar to section 5.5. It says subject to section 5, the chief executive officer shall be employed. I'm saying in the absence of that at section 7.2, you can see there is a gap. It is simply an accountability gap. I have that. I understand that. But I'm saying it is a salary. The salaries has no cap under section 7.2. It has absolutely none. No, section 7.2. Section 7.2. There it is an accountability gap. There is no salary cap, and it's in the absence of subject to section 5.5, wide powers. And this is in the vein that section 8 says they are to be paid from the funds of the authority, which shall consist of 8A, such monies as may from time to time be placed at its disposition for the purpose of this act by Parliament, and B, all other monies and other property which may in any manner become payable to or vested in the authority in respect of any matter incidental to its function. That is where the monies come from, and section 7.2 allows these persons to be paid from that. And there's no section 5, so it's not subject to the minister responsible. Now, I turn to the aspect of I will call it cost to taxpayers. So we must pass laws that will minimize taxpayers being called upon to foot the bill for waste, corruption, and lack of accountability resulting from the accountability gap that is present in this legislation. For example, there is in the schedule resignation of the CEO as well as revocation of appointment by the Prime Minister. It is a feature that promotes political pageantry. If in the event, and I will address secrecy versus indemnity, but if in the event the CEO does something untoward and at the end of it, it's wasting taxpayers' money, all the Prime Minister has to do is to revoke his CEOship. Simple. Just say you're no longer the CEO, and the Prime Minister would have pretty much says, I've done my duty, the person was a miscreant and don't include me. Just simply fire him, and we would have, the Parliament would have said, okay, we did our work. Can't be that way. That is an example. So that in and of itself has to be revisited in terms of how we deal with it. And here's it. We have what is known as the criminalizing for disclosure versus indemnity for conduct in good faith. So I know Damien earlier said the member from St. Catherine Northwest, earlier borrowed my context matters and don't intend to pay me for it. But I must say, context in fact matters. There is, my only critique of this is that we can't turn ordinary citizens and even workers who in good faith, where there are competing legislations, we cannot criminalize them for having integrity and for having good conscience. I'm saying that in the vein that in the absence of national security, what would be the basis to block access to information? So this is the ATI legislation, and where transparency is concerned, and if anyone has ever used the ATI legislation, one of the first answers is we cannot give you the information because of national security. In relation to what Section 14 is saying, is that the employee would not be able to give out information in relation to any type of document, and the document may not necessarily be national security. The document may not be one of national security. So we use the secrecy aspect of and put them in legislation oftentimes, and it is just a misunderstanding of the object and purpose for that. And I would invite us to revisit this aspect of it, because well, I would like to say it is a misunderstanding, because if it were by design, it actually doesn't, because unless a simple fix would be Section 14.2, in the absence of it using the word prescribed persons, and I would also listen, I am saying this is a term of art because we have a Protected Disclosure Act 2011, and it speaks of prescribed persons. Prescribes persons. This says permitted, and these words are terms of art. It's a simple fix, and I'm inviting the Parliament as legislators to fix it. If we simply say prescribed and designated persons, it would fix a simple gap. A simple accountability gap, especially when we're calling on employees to be brought before the court and ultimately convicted. It's a simple fix. It can be accepted or rejected, no problem. But again, the Protected Disclosure Act 2011 under Section 9, it speaks of a feature, the Auditor General, who is always in Parliament from time to time, where the member from St. Catherine, Northwest, has said that it is the whistleblower act or section. Just appreciate that it is important to ensure that it doesn't weaken other, it doesn't minimize or weaken other legislations. We can't draft or try to pass legislation that conflicts with competing legislation, especially when the Protected Disclosure Act, its mandate is to ensure that persons are able to report and protected when they find that conduct from employers or employees are untoward. And it is a part of strengthening the corruption meter, and so left unchecked, it's wholly problematic. That brings us to the other side, the versus, which would be the indemnity. Again, we spoke about the ability to simply resign, a CEO who is allowed to resign versus simply be fired. Again, the taxpayers would be called upon to pay court costs for the CEO or other persons employed or employees in situations where the legislation is speaking about honestly and acting in good faith, and there is no meter to simply measure what that good faith is, especially if it's a civil case. And when you think about matters where if it remains in the parish court, the general rule is that it's a fine or time system. So you may find a CEO in the parish court being called upon to pay a fine and is indemnified by the legislation. I find that problematic, especially when you juxtapose that with what is called the step-in order and the ability to circumvent the entities which are protecting things such as the environment, whether it be human rights, whether it be just property rights, that is National Land Agency, National Works Agency, NEPA, all of these agencies which operate under what is known as mature consideration. So this is in the vein that when it comes to situations of environment, human rights, and capitalizing on the human potential, whether these entities know it or not, they are the ones responsible for ensuring that one thing doesn't affect the other. And so the step-in order would then act as a mechanism to circumvent that. And then when it comes to anything going wrong, all those entities will say is, but my power was taken away from me by virtue of this legislation. And as such, we are then called upon to say, what do we do? And it becomes, again, political pageantry. So I'm just simply saying that we ought to look at that in its entirety, because taking away the power, especially rebuilding, is, notwithstanding that it has to be expedited, is something that must be done with mature consideration. I'm sure that we can appreciate that. So, as it is now, I will simply say that there's more work to be done before, if this legislation were to pass as is, it would be problematic and embarrassing for our parliament. And there are legislators and persons much senior to me, and I call upon you all to back me on the amendments that I speak on, and we are to be responsible as we are pushing legislation through. Thank you. Madam Speaker.
Member from St. Andrew West? Northwest. Northwest?